Hello students, this is going to be your SAT Prep Trimester 1 exam, going over the topics that we've talked about so far this trimester. Here you're going to be given a non-calculator section, and in this section there are 13 questions and you have 20 minutes. And just note that this is the table of information that's given to you on every math section of the SATs. Most of it is geometry formulas that might be helpful for you in this section. Problem number 1. Which of the following is an equation of the line L in the XY plane? Well, when we saw questions like this in this trimester, what we've done is we pick a point that's on the line. So in this case, we can pick any point that's on the line. So here is a point up here, and that is the point x is 3, y is 4. So that's the point 3, 4. So if I plug in that point, it has to make the equation check. So for example, letter A, x is equal to 1. That's not true. X is equal to 3. So that's not true. Letter B, y is equal to 1? No. In my point, y is equal to 4. If it's an equation of the line, then it has to make the equation check. Letter C, y is equal to x. Well, that's not correct. 4 is not equal to 3, so that doesn't check. Here your answer is going to be letter D, y equals x plus 1, because 3 plus 1, that equals 4. So here our answer is letter D. One of the tactics that we've talked about is to just, for many of the questions, plug in your answer choices and see which work. Problem 3, which are the solutions to this quadratic equation? Well, in your math class, you talked about solving quadratic equations. You can either solve them by factoring, by the quadratic formula, or by completing the square. Here I'm going to factor out an x. So here I'm going to have x squared, that gives me 4x squared, minus 2x, that gives me minus 8x if I distribute the 4, and then minus 3. So now I'm going to try to factor what's in parentheses, x squared minus 2x minus 3. That factors into x minus 3 times x plus 1. So here I'm going to set each of the factors equal to 0. Officially you should set 4 equal to 0, but that gets rejected because it doesn't check. So here your two answers are x is equal to positive 3 and x is equal to negative 1. That's going to be letter B. Again, another way of going about doing the question is to plug the answer choices in. So for example, you could have taken this equation and plugged in 3 just to see that it checks. 4 times 3 squared minus 8 times 3 minus 12. 3 squared is 9. 4 times 9 is 36. 8 times 3 is 24. 36 minus 24 minus 12. Check it on your calculator. That works as well. So either solving by using the math that you know, or solving by plugging the answer choices into your equation. Problem 4, which of the following is an example of a function whose graph in the xy plane has no x-intercepts? So we want to try to figure out an equation that has no x-intercepts, an equation that doesn't touch, doesn't cross, doesn't intersect the x-axis. And letter A, a linear function whose rate of change is not 0. A linear function is just a line. And here they're telling you the rate of change, the slope, is not 0. In geometry, you learned about slopes, and lines that have 0 slope, are horizontal lines. But this one here says a line whose slope, rate of change, is not 0. So if you have a slope that's not 0, your line's not going to be horizontal, meaning it will eventually cross the x-axis somewhere. So here the answer is not letter A, because that will have an x-intercept. A quadratic function with real zeros. Well, quadratic equations, x-squared equations, when you graph them, are parabolas. And parabolas can either go through the x-axis twice, parabolas can just touch the x-axis once, or parabolas can stay above the x-axis or below the x-axis and not touch the x-axis at all. So if your parabola crosses the x-axis, remember the x-intercepts are the zeros. The zeros is just another way in math of saying the x-intercepts. And the SAT loves to put that math definition on it. So the zeros are just the x-intercepts. So, for example, letter B, a quadratic function with real zeros, that would mean it would cross the x-axis because it has zeros. That's not what we want. The question is saying which equation has no x-intercepts, with no zeros. Well, if you just know that an x-intercept is a zero, here your answer has to be letter C, a quadratic equation with no real zeros, because the zeros are the x-intercepts. A cubic polynomial, that means an x to the third equation, and x to the third equations, they have these two general patterns. They either increase, kind of stop, and then continue increasing forever, or a cubic equation kind of decreases, increases slightly, and then decreases forever. Either way, the cubic polynomial will eventually cross the x-axis once. So here's the key to the question, understanding that the zeros are just another fancy way of saying x-intercepts. Problem number 5. In the equation above, k is just a constant. A constant is just a number in math. So k is a constant. If x is equal to 9, what is the value of k? What I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in x is equal to 9, and I'm going to solve for k. So here I'm going to have radical k plus 2 minus x, so minus 9, equals 0. And the way you solve radical equations is you try to get the radical by itself. So here we're going to add 9 to both sides. The way you get rid of a radical is then you square both sides of the equation. So here we're going to have k plus 2 equals 81. So here when we subtract 2 on both sides, k is equal to 79. And again, another way of going about getting your answer is just simply taking all the answer choices and plugging them in. If you have your equation and they tell you that x is equal to 9, you can just basically plug in these different values for k. So if I plug in k as 79, I get radical 79 plus 2. 79 plus 2 is 81, and the square root of 81 is 9. So 9 minus 9 would have to be 0. So on the SATs, you can go about solving them using the math that you learned in high school, or when you have equations that you need to solve, you can simply take the answer choices and substitute them in and see which works. Problem 6, which of the following is equivalent to the sum of these expressions? So here we want to take a squared minus 1 and add a plus 1. So here we're going to have a squared minus 1. And then since we have a plus, we're just going to drop the parentheses. So plus a plus 1. So here we're going to have a squared, negative 1 and positive 1 cancel, plus a. So a squared plus a, or answer choice A. Number 7, Jackie has 2 summer jobs. She works as a tutor, which pays $12 an hour, and she works as a lifeguard, where she earns $9.50 an hour. She can work no more than 20 hours a week. So here they're telling you, if you scan down in the question, X is the number of hours she tutors, and Y is the number of hours she's a lifeguard. So if we kind of go back, it says she can work no more than 20 hours per week. So if I take the number of hours she tutors and I add that to the number of hours she works as a lifeguard, she can work no more than, which in math is less than or equal to 20. So that's the first inequality I can write. I can eliminate answer choice A because that says x plus y is greater than or equal to 20. Also, letter D, x plus y is greater than or equal to 20. That's not true. Here it says she wants to earn at least 220 hours per week. Now, at least in math means greater than or equal to. So she wants to earn at least 220. Without even writing the second inequality, I can rule out letter B because that has less than or equal to 220. So here I know my answer is going to be letter C. And how can I figure out how much money she earns? If I take the number of hours she tutors, multiply it by how much she earns, and the number of hours she lifeguards, multiply that by the amount of money she earns, that would have to be greater than or equal to. So this question just boils down to you understanding no more than and at least then and which inequality symbols they correspond to. Problem 8, in air, the speed of sound s in meters per second is a linear function of the air temperature. So s stands for the speed of sound, and T stands for the degrees Celsius. And we have this function, and the question is saying, which of the following statements best represents this number 331.4? Well, if you kind of compare the function to the equation of a line, y equals mx plus b, m would be the 0.6, and b would be the 331.4. M is the slope, which stands for the change. So letters C and D are not correct because they refer to the increase in the speed of sound. The increase of the speed of sound, that refers to the slope, the change. Here they're asking you what is the value of 331.4. That is the y-intercept of the equation. Now what does that mean? Well, the y-intercept is the point where the graph crosses the y-axis. So here it crosses the y-axis at 331.4. You'd have to go up to 331.4. The coordinate of that point is the point 0, 331.4, because any point on the y-axis has as its x value 0. Now what does x represent? Well, there's no x, there's a t. T represents the degrees Celsius. So basically they're saying when t is 0, when it's 0 degrees Celsius, 331.4 represents the speed of sound. So in that case, the answer is going to be letter A. But if you kind of compare that to the y equals mx plus b, it starts to make sense in the context of the question, because there's a lot of questions like this on the SATs. Problem 9, if xy is a solution to the system of equations, and x is greater than 0, so here they're telling you that x has to be a positive value, what is the value of x times y? So this is an example of a quadratic and linear system of equations. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to solve this by substitution. Since you're told y equals x squared, I'm going to take the y out of the second equation and simply substitute in x squared. So here I'm going to have 2 times y. Well, now it's going to be 2 times x squared plus 6 equals, I'll distribute the 2, so 2x plus 6. So here I'm going to solve this quadratic equation by bringing everything over to the left. So here I'm going to subtract 2x, and here I'm going to subtract 6. And here when I subtract 6 on both sides, the 6's cancel. So here I have 2x squared minus 2x equals 0. I will solve this by factoring. I'll take out the greatest common factor of x and 2. So I have 2x times x is 2x squared. 2x times negative 1 is negative 2x. And then I'll set each of these factors equal to 0 and solve. So here it looks like my two answers for x turn out to be x is equal to 0 and x is equal to 1. But the question says x has to be bigger than 0. So we're going to reject this 0 as our answer. I know that x is equal to 1. And now I will plug that value back into either equation to get the y value. So here I have, since y is equal to x squared, and x is equal to 1, y is equal to 1 squared, or 1. So here, x is 1. Here, y is 1. So my solution as a point would be 1, 1, but they're not asking me that. They're asking me what is the value of x times y. So that's just going to be 1 times 1, or 1, or answer choice A. Problem 10, a squared plus b squared equals z, and a times b equals y, which is equivalent to 4z plus 8y. And here my answer choices all have a's and b's in them. So my goal is going to be to take out the z and the y and try to get just a's and b's into my expression. So this is kind of like substitution. Here, since z is equal to a squared plus b squared, I'll plug in z is equal to a squared plus b squared. And here, since I'm told y is equal to a times b, I'm going to have 8 times a times b. So I simply took out the z and took out the y and substituted in the a's and the b's in their spot. Now what do I have going on here? Here I have 4 parentheses a squared plus b squared plus 8ab. So here I'm going to distribute. I'm going to have 4a squared plus 4b squared plus 8ab. And now what I'll do is I'll take my answer choices, FOIL them out, and see which matches this. So for example, letter A plus 2b squared, that's the same as a plus 2b times a plus 2b, or if I FOIL that, here I'm going to have a times a, which is a squared. It's already no good because I need 4a squared. So answer choice A is not correct. Here I'll take answer choice B. 2a plus 2b squared. So that's the same as 2a plus 2b times another 2a plus 2b. Or that's going to be first, 2a times 2a is 4a squared. That's good. Here I'm going to have 2a times 2b, which is 4ab. And here the insides, 2b times 2a is another 4ab. Together they're going to give me the 8ab, which is what I need. And then the last, 2b times 2b is 4b squared. So here my answer is going to be letter B. I could have also ruled out answers C and D, because when I FOIL, 4a times 4a is 16a squared, and that's no good. I only needed 4a squared. Same difference here. 4a squared is going to be 16a squared, and that's no good. So here my answer is letter B. Problem 12. They ask you 9 to the 3/4 power. And they give you 4 different options. Now, the rule for fractional exponents is it turns into a radical. The base is the radicand. So here we're going to have 9. The denominator is the index. So here we're going to have the 4th root of 9. And then the numerator is the exponent. So this is the fourth root of 9 to the third power, or that could be written as the fourth root of 9 to the third. Mathematically, they're equal to each other. And that's not there. I have the cube root of 9, I have the fourth root of 9. So I have to come up with a plan B. And what I'm going to do is this. If you have 9 raised to the 3/4 power, I know that 9 is the same as 3 squared. So I'm going to replace the 9 with 3 squared. So I have 3 squared raised to the 3/4 power. And now when you have a power to a power, the rule in math says to multiply. So this is going to be 3 to the 2 times 3/4 power, or 3 to the 6/4 power, or 3 to the 3/2 power. Now what does that turn into? Well, this turns into, by that exponent rule from before, 3 as the radicand, 2 as the index. So it's the square root of 3 to the third power. The square root of 3, usually you don't write the 2 when it's a square root. You just kind of write it as like this. But it really is implied that 2 is the index. So that's the same as the square root of 3 to the third, or the square root of 3 squared times 3 to the first, which is the square root of 9 times 3, and that can be broken up into radical 9 times radical 3, and radical 9 is just the number 3. So after doing all of that, here your answer turns out to be 3 radical 3, or letter D. So it was a lot of exponent rules and radical rules for that problem 12. Problem 13, at a restaurant, n cups of tea are made by adding tea bags to hot water. If t equals n plus 2, what I tend to do in these questions is I tend to choose numbers and see what my answer turns out to be. So since n represents the cups of tea, let's say that the restaurant makes 2 cups of tea. Well, if n is 2, it says t is equal to n plus 2. So t is going to be equal to, in my case, 2 plus 2, or t is equal to 4. So basically, when they make 2 cups of tea, it says they're going to be adding 4 tea bags. Now the question says, how many additional tea bags are needed to make each additional cup of tea? So we're talking about each additional cup of tea. So I pretended that n was 2. Let's say n is 3. Let's say they're making 3 cups of tea. Then t is going to be equal to n plus 2, or t is going to be equal to 3 plus 2, or t is going to be 5. So when they make 2 cups of tea, they add 4 tea bags. When they add 3 cups, they're going to be adding 5 tea bags. So what does that mean? It says, how many additional tea bags? Well, they went from 4 to 5. So here the answer is going to be letter B, or 1. Problem 15, Alan drives an average of 100 miles per week. His car can average 25 miles per gallon. So basically, it's going to be averaging 4 gallons per week. 4 gallons per week. Because his car can go 25 miles per gallon. He's going 100 miles, so he's going 25 times 4, so he needs 4 gallons of gas per week. It says, assuming gasoline costs $4 per gallon. So since he's using 4 gallons, and gas costs $4 per gallon, it's going to be costing Alan $16 per week. Now the question says, Alan would like to reduce his weekly expenditure on gas by $5. So he wants not to spend $16 per week. He wants to spend $11 per week. How many fewer miles should he drive each week? So now I'm going to work backwards. He wants to spend $11 per week. He knows he has to go 100 miles, but he's trying to figure out how many fewer he has to go. So my 100 minus m, 100 minus m is going to be the new distance. His car still gets 25 miles per gallon. So the old driving pattern, he used 4 gallons. The new driving pattern, he's going to be using 100 minus m over 25. Because before I did 100 over miles per gallon, now I'm doing 100 minus m over 25 miles per gallon. Well, I still have to multiply that by the price of the gasoline. So I have to multiply that by the $4 per gallon. So this is the equation that I'm going to use to go about solving for m. I have 100 minus m over 25 times 4 equals 11. So here if I bring the 4 to the front, because you're used to seeing that 4 written before the parentheses, so I have 4 times 100 minus m over 25 equals 11. Here I'll distribute, if I put the 4 over a 1, I'm going to multiply 4 times each of those and then 1 times the 25. So I have 400 minus 4m over 25 equals 11. So here to solve for m, how many fewer miles he has to go, I'll multiply both sides by 25 to make that fraction disappear. So here I'm going to have 11 times 25, or I'm going to have 275. Here I'm going to subtract 400 on both sides. So here I'm going to have negative 4m equals negative 125, or if I divide both sides by negative 4, here I'm going to get a positive 31.25. If I do 4 into 125, that's 12. And then 4 into 5 goes once with 3 remainder. So 31.25. So that's the answer for M. He has to drive 31.25 miles less. Now in a perfect world, that would be there. But now they're giving me these equations that I have to go about solving for M. But I know my M is going to be 31.25. So here for letter A, if I have 25 over 4m equals 95, I can solve by multiplying by the reciprocal. I can multiply both sides by 4 over 25. So here I have m equals 4 over 25 times 95, or I'm going to be left with 380 over 25, which is not equal to 31.25. Here I believe, if you go about solving letter D, if I take 4/25 times m equals 5, if I multiply both sides by 25 over 4, here I'm going to be left with m is equal to 125 over 4, which is what I got before. 125 over 4, or 31.25. So here your answer is going to be letter D.